My name's Paige Clapper. I'm a customer success architect at VMware. I'm going to go through with you today the AppDefense deployment cycle, but before we get started with that, I wanted to remind you of some prerequisites. First is going to be that you need to have ESXi 6.5. You're going to need to have VM tools installed, and if you're using Microsoft, you're going to need to have hardware level 13. We also support Linux, and for the specific versions of these, please check our documentation. Okay, so first when we get started, anything higher up on the board means that it requires a higher level of activity. So that'll be higher up, and then the lower down things, of course, would mean lower activity on your part. So week 1, this will be your deployment week. And what this will involve is the deployment of your appliance, your host, which you can do through the AppDefense UI, and the guest, which will be through VM tools. After you have the deployment in, actually in part of the step of the deployment, we have a few integrations that you can choose to integrate into your AppDefense deployment. So that would be NSX. NSX will allow you to quarantine as a remediation action, and I'll talk about remediation actions a little bit later. But this is one of the high benefits of integrating NSX with AppDefense. Second will be VRA and then Puppet. And both of these are automation tools. So what this means is you can actually automate your scopes and services into AppDefense. And then any change you make in Puppet, for example, would then come over to the AppDefense UI. So you don't need to make that same change in 2 UIs. It's just going to be with one. So speaking of scopes, next would be the deployment of your scopes. This will take about 30 minutes depending on how many scopes you have. But essentially what a scope is a data center application. And a service, which lives within the scope, is going to be a tier of that data center application. This could be, for example, like a web server, a database, an app server. We have many options for that. So essentially the first initial deployments of these 3 will be about 90 minutes. And then later on you're going to want to provision your scopes. As soon as you put your scopes into AppDefense, they will automatically go into discovery mode, which will be week 2 to 3. And we like to call this vacation week. That's the beach with the sun. So essentially, you can go on vacation for the next couple of weeks while AppDefense does all the work for you. And what it's going to do is learn the behaviors of each of the scopes. So as soon as you put it in, this will just follow the processes of whatever VMs or whatever this application's doing. And AppDefense will collect all of those behaviors for the next 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how many behaviors your application has. So as soon as it hit a threshold of where we're not learning many new things with your application, then we can come back to the tool and start to look at putting it into protected mode, which would be week 3 to 4. So essentially, as soon as we've decided that not many new behaviors are being learned, we're going to verify those behaviors. And what I mean by this is AppDefense has many built-in pre-checklists of whether the reputation is good or this is a known process, etc. So any of the remaining unknown behaviors that you have, which should be a very small subset of the actual behaviors that we've learned in the application, is what you'll need to verify. And then as soon as you've verified those, you can then put your application into protected mode. Once it's in protected mode, anything that is outside of this sublist of behaviors that you have decided is the actual processes of this application or verified that, you'll just get alerts on anything that's outside of that until you decide to take a remediation action. And this could be, for example, quarantine. It also can just be to block that behavior, suspend the VM, shut down, etc. We do have best practices around how to, first of all, set up your scopes and then pick the best remediation process for that. But essentially, you'll have a few options to protect your application. So then as soon as that is all done, the final week, I'll just put here. Would be to tune your rules. So what I mean by that is if you do have alerts come in or you happen to find that you didn't want to block some behavior, you can go ahead this week and just verify that every rule that you've set is actually what you want. And then just continue to monitor the alarms that you're getting. So following that, you will have a fully protected application. There are a few things that I recommend you do as a soft rec before you start this process. And that would be to have a deployment plan. For example, your hardware may not be up to date completely, or you might have a large amount of applications that you want to put into AppDefense. It's best to choose the applications that are mission critical first, and then go through this process, and then you can add as many applications or scopes as you move forward in the process. And then second is to have a scope planning meeting. Again, I mentioned we do have some best practices around this, but the way that you set up your scopes and then services within that scope will help you have the highest level of protection and allow us to find any unwanted behaviors that you might have in your application. So that's it for the deployment cycle. Thank you.